Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Culture Hack. It's Matt Furness here from Click Culture Consulting, and I'm delighted to be joined today by Serkan Deveci. Serkan is a HR leader at Google. He's a keynote speaker, and he's also doing a doctorate in psychology. He's a fantastic guy, and I'll be honest, I don't know how he manages to squeeze everything into his days. I'm really looking forward to talking to him today about all things culture. So welcome, Serkan. Thank you so much for coming on.
Hi, Matt. Hi, everyone. Thanks a lot.
So,
Nice to meet you.
Great. So we'll be talking today about your experiences with culture. But first, I'd love to know a little bit more about your story and your background.
Right. Okay. I'll start from the beginning. Okay. So I grew up in Mersin. It's a port city by the Mediterranean Sea in Turkey. It's a beautiful city with its official colors being blue, green, and orange. So blue you have for the sea, green for its tall palm trees, and orange colors for the orange fruit. It's a nice, lively, and respectful city with a big interfaith community. And by the end of my teenage years, I moved to Istanbul for college. I studied economics in Galatasaray University. And that's where I met with my wife. We were in the same faculty. And actually, in a couple of months, we're celebrating our 20th anniversary of being together.
Congrats.
Thank you. We have an 8-year-old daughter, although I'm sure she'd correct me if she hears me call her 8-year-old a couple of weeks before her birthday, so I'll be in trouble. But she was born in Dublin, Ireland, and that's where we live and call home for the last 15 years. I work in Google, as you know, as the global HR lead for its international sales division. And prior to that, I worked in various sectors and industries like banking, consultancy, FMCG, sales, and now HR. It was an exciting move from my decade-long sales and marketing career to HR, I think what's now around 7 years ago. And as a leader in commercial side of the business myself, I always believed that you could have the best product or best services, the most relevant solutions to problems. But if you don't have the best people, and unless you genuinely and meaningfully invest in these best people, none of it really matters. Your best product won't be a revenue and growth generator without your people. So there was this point around half a decade ago. I made the bold decision to shift what I define as my successful sales career to my current path in HR. So I come from the commercial side of the business to HR. And how I think about this is, if you ask business leaders anywhere, they'd say HR don't understand us. And ask HR leaders, and they will say business don't listen to us. And this is what I like to think I've brought in to effectively align the most critical parts of a company. So deeply understand and know what business cares about with my first-hand business experience, what the commercial goals of the company are, and really lead from the front to align strategy for people and culture with that. So it gives me a real excitement and fulfillment to invest in people. And working with people that closely, in that level and granularity, I think it requires a good understanding of human behavior and mind, how people perceive things. And I'm a passionate learner and a bit of a thinker myself. So I got my master's degree while working in HR at Google, and it was in King's College London on neuroscience. Now I'm studying my PhD, as you also mentioned, in psychology at University of Warwick, where I'm researching the fascinating relationships between leadership behaviors, organizational culture, and employee well-being and engagement that hopefully leads to higher performance. And funnily enough, I'm so much into psychology and brain science that I remember my daughter when she was as young as 4 years old. And whenever she was scribbling on a piece of paper, she was always saying that she is studying psychology. And as much as a proud moment for a dad, I think also it was possibly a signal to shift my attention at the time. But here we go. Well, that's me in a nutshell.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And honestly, I could ask so many different questions there. But I want to pick up on one thing you said about tensions between HR and the business, and HR feeling like the business aren't listening to them, and the business feeling like HR don't truly understand them. So my question would be, I guess, what are some other stubborn challenges like that one that you've come across when it comes to trying to lead and shape organizational culture?
Hmm. I've always liked a simple definition of culture because it's a vast topic. And for me, I think culture is the sum of values, norms, and guiding assumptions. Like it's not just what we say we stand for as a company, but how those values show up in everyday actions within the company. I think it's the norms we follow and those guiding assumptions that really shape how we work together. And when I say guiding assumptions, I'm really talking about those beliefs we don't always articulate, but that drive a lot of what we do, right? Um, they're almost like an organization subconscious, I think. For example, leaving the office late in the evening. So in my previous life in another company, that was the case. At around 6 p.m., you look around to see who is leaving first because you don't want to be the one leaving the office, because you don't want to get the odd looks from others. So it's subconscious. No one is doing it because they're evil. It's just that's how the culture evolved. And this culture has then evolved how the employees perceive and think about their colleagues and what's around them. I think that's kind of guiding assumptions. Another one, in a meeting, you always have to talk and show that you have an idea, even if you don't at that moment, because you think that's what's valued in the company, right? Less thinking and listening, but more talking and showing off. And that's an assumption, almost like a non-verbal agreement that guides actual behaviors in an organization. And I always believe that all these assumptions shape the way people behave, sometimes in ways that clash with the values that a company is trying to promote. Now, specifically to your question, then, for me, I think there are three hard to shake challenges in the way of shaping culture. The first one I would say is that mentality of because we have always done it this way. If you think about it, there's a comfort in sticking to what's familiar, even if it's no longer effective. I think we are all attached to routines and processes that we have been doing for years. And with this mentality, we actually ignore the situational context. That was before, not now. Now is in a different context. So we have always done it this way won't work effectively this time because now has a different situational context. Also, when we are, I think, stuck with this mentality, there is no evolution for positive growth in the organization. So I really think that this mentality is quite risky for companies. But interestingly, well, with my education on neuroscience, I have to say it, our brains are wired for that mentality. When we do something repeatedly, it becomes like a muscle memory. So those neural pathways get stronger and stronger. And this is partly due to neurochemicals like dopamine and serotonin, which gives us that little hit of pleasure and happiness. When we complete a task or stick to a routine, it's like our brain is rewarding us for staying in our comfort zone. So when we think about changing those habits, it feels like we are creating a new path in our brains, which takes more effort, more energy, and doesn't come with that same dopamine boost. Plus, familiar routines give us a sense of control. So they feel safe and predictable. Even if the old way isn't effective anymore, our brains want to stick with it because it's what we know. And this is why many times we resist change. It's not that we don't want to improve, but our brains naturally prefer what I suppose feels comfortable and rewarding at that time.
Like a status quo bias.
Exactly. And a good example to that status quo bias is, I think, meeting cultures in the workplace. So in some organizations, maybe in many organizations, you'd see that there's an expectation that every decision needs a meeting, no matter how small they are. Even if a couple of short, simple email threads would get us where we want to be, people just automatically schedule meetings out of routine. So the habit of meeting first persists. But then you have wasted time, delayed progress, but it feels more comfortable because that's how we have always done things.
Mm.
So I suppose that's the number one challenge. The second one is strategy changes more often than culture does. And then on the opposite end, culture doesn't shift as quickly as business strategy does. So think about it. When the business pivots, the culture doesn't automatically follows. So say a company shifts its strategy to focus on innovation. That sounds amazing. But what if the existing culture is all about risk avoidance and perfectionism? There's a real mismatch there. It's not going to promote innovation focus. So employees won't suddenly start experimenting more just because the strategy says they should. And they will feel hesitant or, at some places, even, I suppose, fearful. If the norm has always been to play it safe, why would they take risks? So there is really a disconnect there. And that causes confusion. And in many times, I think, disengagement as well among employees. So when they see a strategy that encourages boldness, but the culture pushes them toward caution, it creates that friction. And so employees will feel torn between what they are told and what they are experiencing. That's my number two. Number three is silent saboteurs. And I keep telling myself for years that I have to change this word. I have to find another word because it's so hard to pronounce, but I think I'm getting away with it. Silent saboteurs are like, they're tricky because they're not always easy to see. They are I think, unspoken attitudes or behaviors that subtly undermine cultural efforts. And what's most frustrating about them is that they are accepted as just the way things are. I'm just thinking of an example of a silent saboteur. Let's say a company might say teamwork is a core value. But if there's an unspoken belief that star performers get all the recognition, it then creates a culture of individualism rather than collaboration. And people will hesitate to share their ideas or even to work together because it sends a message that only a few get celebrated, and that can be discouraging. If a team member consistently goes above and beyond, but never receives recognition for their contributions, how do you think that affects the team? Because others will see the lack of recognition and they will feel discouraged. They will eventually think, what's the point of sharing my ideas if no one will notice anyway? So in all of these three challenges, and potentially many more that we haven't touched upon yet, I think there needs to be an intentional effort to shape cultural norms and reshape cultural norms to support the new direction. But that certainly takes time.
Yeah, makes sense. So you started off by talking about like the organizational subconscious that I thought was really interesting. And it sounds like the three challenges then are, one is this bias towards the status quo, even when we know that that's not actually what's good for us now. Second is strategy changes quickly, culture takes time to catch up, and it takes a long time sometimes to get people to change their behavior. And probably by the time they've changed their behavior, there's maybe a new strategic focus by then. Yeah. And then the final one is silent saboteurs. So it sounds like these people who intentionally or not intentionally are showing behaviors that conflict with the desired culture, and they're not getting called out. So if those are the barriers or the challenges, and you want to, I guess the first step is getting leaders to invest, to even think about culture as being something that is important, something that needs to be focused on, as opposed to it being this soft, fluffy thing. So how can you get leaders to that place? How can you address the barriers that stop leaders and organizations from investing in culture?
Yeah. It's a good question. I think culture is really deeply rooted in beliefs and behaviors. And I just briefly talked about how brain works, really very briefly, of course. And for that neurobiological reasons, and also for many other social circumstances, these beliefs and behaviors, these things don't change overnight. Even if everyone knows a shift is needed, it's not that simple, because people want to stick around with the old ways because they feel comfortable. So familiar routines can be hard to let go of, right? But they're not impossible. And I think this is what many leaders or companies miss. Overcoming this takes patience and consistency. And it means reinforcing the new ways of, I think, doing things over and over until they become the new norm. Sometimes you see a company trying to shift their culture, and they try to lead a change. They do everything you'd find in a change textbook, right? But the result is zero, because leaders get discouraged or they are frustrated, and that's because the change hasn't taken place after a few weeks only. But change takes time. And this is what I meant when I said this is what many leaders and companies are missing. Cultural shift takes even more time than a simple change. So a real awareness. Yeah.
It's like, I was just going to say, it's like wanting to lose weight, going to the gym for 4 weeks, and then if you've only lost a tiny bit of weight or even no weight at all, you go, oh, well, this isn't working. I'm gonna scrap it.
Love that analogy.
Diets, putting on muscle, losing weight, whatever the thing is, it takes time, and we're not talking days and weeks. We're talking months and years sometimes.
Yeah.
And it's the same with culture, right?
Exactly, and that's why patience and consistency are critical, right? And I think in all that, then, leading and shaping culture and overcoming all those stubborn challenges, they require a complete rethinking of systems. And when I say systems, I don't just mean processes or tools. It's really about, I think, understanding the whole ecosystem of the organization. So how behaviors, norms, and beliefs all interact with one another. Or what is the incentive structure? How do we recognize as an achievement? Or how do we, recognize a low performance? What are the technologies in place? What changes will be needed in these technologies and tools? So I think all these elements work together to shape our culture. That's the part of the system. And to make a real change, then, we need to redefine what behaviors we celebrate, update our recognition structures, and shift leadership styles to match that. But one thing that is really very important is leaders must role model the behaviors that they want to see. So especially when it comes to the unwanted behaviors or those silent saboteurs, leaders should call out behaviors that don't align with the desired culture. And it's not about pointing fingers, but for me, it's about really creating an open dialogue. You need to address these subtle dynamics. And of course, tackling these challenges, they're not easy. But when you can identify them and address them, you start to build a culture that's truly aligned with your values and the direction you want the organization to take. And it's an ongoing process, as I said. It's not a one-time project.
And so because everything you're saying is great, but I think there will be leaders who go, all right, but if I'm investing all this time, money, and effort in something, I need to know that it's actually, I'm okay with being patient, but I need to know it works. And I think maybe sometimes they give up because they go, well, it's been a month or 2 months and I've not seen any change. So then my question is, what are the types of cultural initiatives that you can hang your hat on because you know they will have a significant impact and if you stick with them?
Yeah. I love the word cultural initiatives because I do think that it's misunderstood. When we talk about cultural initiatives, people tend to think about HR programs or some formal interventions. But for me, that's not really it. Because the most impactful cultural shifts, they come from a collective ownership of culture. And it's not just an HR project or initiative. It's something everyone in the organization must embrace. When culture change is seen as just another program led by HR, people tend to roll their eyes and say, okay, here we go again. So they don't stick. And I think real impact happens when leaders take personal ownership. So they don't outsource culture to HR, but they co-lead it. Leaders show up, they model the behaviors they want to see, and they hold themselves accountable just as they do for their teams. So when leaders genuinely commit and engage, it really sends a powerful message. It says, this isn't just a talk, we are living this. And of course, HR leaders, they play a significant role here too, but it's co-leading with leaders, not leading it from the front on their own. So that's why I always think that we need to rethink what cultural initiatives even mean. Is it just those usual suspects like HR programs, workshops, and surveys? But honestly, those are just surface level tactics. Real or like long-lasting cultural change doesn't come from a one-off intervention or a series of checkboxes. It's really about a shift in mindset that goes into every corner of the organization. So it has to tap into every part of the system that's shaping behaviors and norms from the inside out. Because it's when culture becomes part of the DNA of daily life, but not just an agenda item. So for me, the initiatives with the most significant impact aren't always the grand sweeping reforms. They're usually the everyday actions that leaders model and that employees embrace. So when leaders genuinely walk the talk, culture starts to shift. It's not just about giving a speech at a company-wide all-hands or meeting. It's about showing up consistently, being transparent, listening, and even being vulnerable. It's sharing those stories of when things went wrong and what was learned, rather than glossing over mistakes. It's, admitting we are not there yet, but here is what we are doing about it. And that's kind of authenticity from leadership ripples across the organization. It really sets a tone that says it's okay to be human here. And that in itself, I think, is a cultural shift.
So if I was going to summarize that, the thing that you should stick to above and beyond everything else isn't a program or an initiative per se. It's more just consistent role modeling of the right behaviors and taking ownership yourself. And you will notice over time that will change the culture and the behavior of the people around you. It's funny, actually, if I think about someone I used to report into, who I hugely admired and still do admire to this day, and I really look up to him. I maybe worked for him for a couple of years, and honestly, I think almost the way he role modeled influenced my behavior, probably without conscious effort. And it was almost like when you were entering meetings or thinking about projects, I was thinking, I wonder how this person would approach this. Because if you are this shining light of like being a complete role model, people will start to look up to you and they will really, want to repeat those behaviors themselves, right? And you will actually become, I guess, a truly inspirational leader. I know that word's thrown about a lot, but I do think I agree, that is possible. So if that's what you should do, I imagine there are mistakes you've made, or there are things that you've perhaps gotten wrong. So my next question for you would be, if you could rewind 10 years and tell yourself something, what would that thing be? Like, what do you wish you'd known 10 years ago about nurturing culture?
Right. Okay. Well, first off, I think when it comes to culture, even the smallest behaviors matter. So those small behaviors, they accumulate and they develop or reshape the culture in the long term in a way that you might not expect. And I think for that reason, culture isn't just a nice to have. It affects everything from talent attraction to retaining top performance. It's all connected. And the employer brand, I think it is really critical here. You can shape the messaging all you want, but the true employer brand is what people experience day to day. And you could invest heavily in PR and HR campaigns to paint a beautiful picture of a great culture. But if employees aren't living that experience, it will eventually reshape the brand. So authenticity, that is crucial. And another thing is, and I mentioned this before, but I think it's really extremely important, change takes time. Cultural shift takes an even longer time. So we can't underestimate how long it truly takes for cultural change to take root, because cultures don't shift overnight. They evolve through consistent effort. Another point is transparency. It is essential. Sharing the journey openly, like setbacks and lessons learned, as you just also mentioned, that really builds that trust, and it helps accelerate cultural shaping. It's not just about showcasing success stories, it's also about how the organization responds to challenges. So that openness creates a sense of community, and it is critical for genuine culture in an organization. And maybe the last one is, but certainly very important, I think the focus on behaviors, not just values. So values on paper, they don't mean much without corresponding actions. Shaping culture is really about reinforcing specific behaviors that will exemplify those desired values. And it's, again, walking the talk, the role modeling, living the values in action, but on a day-to-day basis. So the significance of those small daily actions that makes the real culture, I suppose, authentic.
Mm. Great. So there's a few things there. And I guess out of everything you've spoken about, what I'd love to do is to narrow it down on almost like one small thing that people can do that perhaps would have the biggest impact possible. So I guess my question would be, what's a culture hack that you love? So something that takes a small amount of effort but has a big impact. So the thing that if people listen to nothing else you said today, Serkan, perhaps they could take this one thing away.
But remember that you are talking to a neuroscience researcher, a former salesperson who used to talk a lot, and an HR leader. So I will try my best to summarize that. But let me start. Let me give it a go. One culture hack. I think, one of them I absolutely love is the power of gratitude. It's simple. It takes little effort, but it can create a huge impact. Just saying thank you can go a long way. So when leaders and colleagues express appreciation for one another, it fosters a sense of belonging, and it creates that important part of the culture. It makes people feel valued. I think that also comes with creating those informal check-ins. And these don't have to be long or formal, and you don't have to wait for the annual review at the end of the year. Just a quick chat over, coffee or a casual lunch can really strengthen relationships.
Mm.
It breaks down all those barriers and it opens lines of communication. And when employees feel connected, they are more engaged and I think motivated.
Mm.
Like when I say thank you, it's about celebrating small wins, acknowledging achievements, and no matter how minor they are, but they can really boost morale. It builds momentum and it creates a positive vibe in the workplace. So you don't need a fancy ceremony. A simple shout out in a meeting or an email to everyone in the organization, it can do the trick.
Mm.
But you know what? Sorry, you said one, but I'll go with the second one as well, if you don't mind.
Go on, go for it.
I also believe in the power of leaders sharing their personal stories. So when leaders open up about their experiences, it brings a sense of authenticity. So encouraging leaders to share moments of vulnerability can really humanize them. And it has an impact on the culture because it helps build connections and reminds everyone that we are all in this together. So when leaders show their authentic selves, it breaks down again those barriers. But it's easier said than done, sharing personal experiences, right? It's not for everyone. And that's totally okay. That should be totally okay. We shouldn't force a leader to share their story. That's not right. What's important is that leaders should understand it's okay to be vulnerable at times. that, they don't have to be perfect all the time. They then feel comfortable and they choose to share more personal experiences. But pushing them to do so isn't the answer, because authenticity comes from a place of choice, not obligation.
I totally agree. It's almost like there is a lot out there at the moment on, you need to be vulnerable as a leader. You need to be vulnerable. But I'm starting to see a bit of a backlash against that. And it's almost like looking at it differently and saying vulnerability can both serve you and others, but no one's going to force you into doing it, right? And you don't have to start break down in tears in front of your teams in order to be an effective leader. Like, it's just about doing what you're comfortable with, maybe pushing yourself out of your comfort zone a little bit and also it's about, I think, taking the pressure off yourself and sort of, as you say, recognizing that you don't need to be perfect and it's okay to make a mistake and no one's going to think worse of you for it. Anyway, and I totally agree with your first point as well around the power of gratitude. And I would add to that and say that's even more important the more senior you are in a business. The more senior you are, the more just simple words of thank you go a long way. So look, I'm conscious of your time. I'm conscious of the listeners' time. So, but just before closing off, do you have any final reflections on our conversation, Serkan?
Look, I think it was a brilliant conversation. Thank you so much for all the questions. And if I maybe summarize, very quickly my points. First, culture is not just a buzzword. It's the backbone of an organization. It really shapes everything from employee satisfaction to business performance. Second, change is a journey. It's not a sprint. It takes time, effort, and genuine commitment from everyone involved. Yes, leaders sometimes get frustrated because change doesn't happen as quickly as they want, but change takes time. It's influenced by how our brains are wired, our social norms, and the dynamics of our society and community. And it's the exact same thing for reshaping the culture. So this awareness, I think, is critical for leaders. And finally, every voice matters. Everyone in the organization has a role in shaping that culture. It's not HR's role only. It's the leaders, employees, HR, all together. So when we create an environment where people feel safe to share their thoughts and ideas, we then have a sense of belonging, and then you start to shape the culture.
Brilliant. Thank you. Summarized so succinctly and concisely and beautifully. So thank you. And I also just want to say a huge thank you to you, Serkan, for sharing your time and your experiences. I really do appreciate it. And if people want to contact you, what's the best way of doing so?
You're right. I'm quite active on LinkedIn. So feel free to connect or follow me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to get in touch. And thank you for inviting me to the podcast as well. It's my pleasure.
No worries. Thank you very much. So I think that's all for today. Thanks so much, Serkan. Thank you for listening and for tuning in. If you like this episode, please don't hesitate to listen to our other episodes for more first-hand experiences and lessons on all things culture. Otherwise, thanks again and go well, everybody.